In a deeply emotional turn of events, Prince William has reportedly broken down in tears following Princess Catherine's heartbreaking announcement concerning their children. What began as a quiet family update has shaken the royal household and left the public reeling. Insiders claim Catherine's revelation carried a weight so personal, so tragic, that even the usually composed prince couldn't hold back his emotions. So what could have possibly caused such devastation within the royal family? Let's break down every detail. A mother's cry beneath the palace gates. The air outside Kensington Palace felt wrong that morning. Too still, too heavy. Even the pigeons that usually fluttered around the gates seemed to sense something monumental was about to happen. Reporters who had camped for days leaned closer, their whispers fading into silence as the palace doors creaked open. Then, Catherine appeared, alone. No aides, no guards, not even a smile. Her steps were careful, almost hesitant, yet there was something unshakable in the way she carried herself, as if each stride was a decision she'd already made and could never undo. Gone was the polished duchess who had graced magazine covers and royal ceremonies. Before the cameras stood a woman stripped of pretense, fragile in frame but fierce in resolve. Her hands trembled as she approached the microphones, not from fear, but from the weight of what she was about to do. For years, the palace had crafted her image with careful precision: perfect mother, loyal wife, graceful royal. But this Catherine was none of those things. She wasn't here to represent the crown. She was here to challenge it. Behind her, the gray stone walls of Kensington seemed to loom larger, their silence pressing down like judgment. The nursery windows, once glowing with laughter, now stared coldly upon her like witnesses to a truth too long hidden. In those rooms, the world had believed royal childhood was a fairy tale. Tiny thrones, playful smiles, perfect family moments captured for the cameras. But the truth Catherine carried in her trembling voice would soon turn that fantasy into something far darker. Whispers spread through the small crowd of royal aides nearby. Should they stop her? Could they? By the time one of them moved, it was too late. Catherine had already adjusted the microphone. There was no grand backdrop, no royal crest behind her. Only the empty expanse of stone and the heavy air of anticipation. The moment felt electric, as though history itself was holding its breath. When she finally looked up, her eyes glistened, not with weakness, but with restrained fire. For the first time, the cameras didn't capture the warmth of her smile. They captured the raw ache of a mother. Every second of silence before she spoke stretched unbearably, thick with the sense that once her words came out, nothing inside those palace walls would ever be the same again. Her voice trembled at first, cracking under the weight of emotion, but then it steadied, soft yet unyielding. "My silence," she said quietly, "was killing me more than any scandal ever could." The words hung in the air, slicing through decades of royal restraint. Gasps rippled through the press line. This wasn't the cautious, well-rehearsed speech of a duchess. This was a confession. She spoke of her children, not as heirs to a throne, but as little souls suffocating under expectations they never asked for. She revealed moments the cameras never showed. George's quiet tears after public appearances, Charlotte's questions about why fun had to be so perfect, and Louis's confusion at seeing his mother smile when she wanted to cry. The facade of royal happiness crumbled with every sentence. "They are children," she whispered, voice shaking. "Yet every day they live in the shadow of what they're meant to become." Those words hit harder than any political scandal ever could. Catherine wasn't attacking the crown. She was pleading for her children's right to be human, simply. Then her tone shifted, sorrow giving way to steel. She described how every gentle gesture, every hug, every laugh, every stumble was dissected by the press, turned into stories that stripped her family of privacy and peace. The monarchy's obsession with image, she said, had turned her children's innocence into public property. "No crown," she declared, her voice suddenly steady and fierce, "is worth a child's peace of mind." The world fell silent. Even the reporters lowered their cameras, caught between awe and disbelief. In that moment, Catherine wasn't a royal. She was every mother who had ever fought for her child's safety, every woman who'd ever been told to stay silent and smile. The tremor in her words rippled through the monarchy itself, shaking centuries of tradition built on control and secrecy. But the world had only heard the beginning, because what came next wasn't just a continuation, it was a reckoning. The palace had barely recovered from her confession when she prepared to deliver the second speech that shook the crowd. What truth could be powerful enough to silence an entire kingdom? Keep watching to find out. The hidden war inside the royal nursery. Behind the shimmering walls of Kensington and Windsor, where photographers captured smiles and picture-perfect waves, a different truth pulsed beneath the surface. The royal nursery, once painted as a cradle of laughter and love, had become something far colder. Every hour of the young royals' lives was carefully planned and rehearsed, their innocence trimmed to fit the expectations of a crown that allowed no imperfection. From their morning lessons to evening walks, nothing was left to chance. Even their laughter seemed measured, as if joy itself required permission. For George, the eldest, the weight of destiny arrived too early. His mother, Catherine, spoke with a trembling voice about how her curious little boy had grown quiet, distant, almost afraid to breathe wrong. Once filled with wonder, he now asked questions no child should have to ask. "What happens if I don't want to be king?" he'd whispered one evening. "What if I'm not good enough?" Palace aides had brushed it aside, reminding him that fate was not a choice. But Catherine knew better. Behind those careful answers, her son's spirit was bending under pressure, his smile replaced by silence, his shoulders carrying a burden far too heavy for a boy his age. Charlotte, his sister, burned with the opposite fire. She rebelled, she questioned, she refused to be molded into the quiet, polished princess the world expected. Catherine admired that defiance. It was a spark of life the palace couldn't extinguish, but it came at a cost. Each display of independence brought private reprimands. Each unroyal question was answered with warnings about duty. To the palace, her boldness wasn't strength, it was a flaw to be corrected. Yet to her mother, it was survival. And then there was little Louis, too young to understand, yet already trapped by the same invisible chains. Catherine revealed how he'd begun to freeze whenever cameras appeared.
Having been lucky enough to meet some of our country's amazing charities and organizations.
Uncertain why strangers screamed his name or studied his every move, the world saw admiration. He saw threat. For him, the flashing lights weren't applause, they were alarms. Even his innocence wasn't safe from the public's hunger. As Catherine spoke of her children, the pain in her voice grew heavier. She had once told herself that the pressure would fade, that this was simply life as a royal. But as the laughter in their home disappeared and silence grew louder, she began to realize it wasn't stress, it was conditioning. Her children were being shaped, not to lead, but to obey, to perform. What she uncovered behind those palace walls went beyond strict parenting. It was a system designed to strip away emotion, to train heirs into living symbols, aligned with royal decorum. "They're not being raised," she said softly. "They're being programmed." Then came her most disturbing revelation: emotional control disguised as discipline. Her children were taught never to cry, never to tremble, never to feel. Vulnerability was treated like weakness. They were praised for composure, punished for emotion. "They're being trained," she whispered, "not to feel but to perform." That line broke through the air like thunder. Childhood wasn't lived, it was rehearsed. Catherine's fury deepened when she spoke of how palace advisors had even dictated her own motherhood. She was told to maintain distance, to let her children learn independence through emotional separation. The same method, she realized, had been used on royal generations before, leaving behind broken hearts hidden beneath crowns. Her voice shook as she said, "No mother should ever be told that love can be harmful." Even William, she confessed, had been caught in that same web. Pressured by royal tradition, he too had been urged to prioritize duty over tenderness. "He loves them," she said, "but he's been taught to love them from afar." It was a line that made the room fall silent, one that carried echoes of another era, another mother, another tragedy. Then came the words that froze everyone listening. This cycle has already taken too many before. She didn't say Diana's name, but she didn't have to. The moment she spoke, her audience felt the ghost of the people's princess stirring again. Catherine's voice, trembling with love and defiance, carried the same fire Diana once had, the fire to protect her children from the same cold system that had consumed her. Around the world, people felt history repeating itself. Catherine's courage was seen as the continuation of Diana's unfinished fight, a battle for compassion within an institution built on restraint. But while the world celebrated her bravery, the palace itself fell into uneasy silence. For behind its golden walls, one man was breaking in ways no one could see. Because as Catherine's words echoed through those corridors, they awakened something long buried in her husband's heart. And that brings us to William's emotional response, a moment so raw, so haunting, that it left everyone asking, what happens when the future king finally feels what the crown taught him to forget? Stay tuned. Prince William's breaking point. For Prince William, that day felt like history folding in on itself. The echo of Catherine's trembling voice still lingered in the corridors of Kensington, refusing to fade. Her confession had cracked open the royal facade, and for the first time, he wasn't sure which side of that fracture he stood on. Pride and pain collided within him. Pride for her courage, and devastation at the truth it forced him to face. The man who had been raised to serve the crown now found himself torn between two sacred vows, one sworn to the monarchy that shaped him, and another to the family that gave him reason to live. In his private chamber, time seemed to slow. The palace outside roared with chaos, phones ringing, advisors rushing, security whispering into radios. But William sat motionless before a glowing television screen. Catherine's speech replayed again and again, every syllable cutting deeper than the last. Her face, filled with both strength and sorrow, reminded him so painfully of his mother that he could barely breathe. The same fire that once lived in Diana's eyes now burned in Catherine's, and it terrified him, because he knew what happened to those who defied the crown. The corridors buzzed with panic. Senior advisors and communications officers flooded the room, papers in hand, voices raised in urgent tones. They demanded a counter-statement, a carefully worded message to restore public confidence and protect the institution. But beneath their calm language hid the same old command: silence her, discredit her, make the problem disappear. William couldn't speak. Every proposed phrase they pushed toward him, every denial, every excuse, felt like a betrayal waiting to happen. The courtiers wanted damage control. William wanted truth, but truth came with a cost. And the moment he opened his mouth, he would have to choose who to protect, the crown or the woman who had just risked everything for their children. One advisor snapped impatiently, saying his hesitation was a betrayal through silence. Another warned that if he didn't act soon, the monarchy's image would crumble. Yet their words only echoed faintly in his mind, because behind all their noise, he heard another voice, his mother's voice. "Never sacrifice truth for duty," Diana had once said. "It will cost you everything." That memory broke something inside him. For years, he had carried the image of her tear-streaked face, the way she had begged to protect him and Harry from the same ruthless system that pretended to care. He remembered the cold smiles of officials telling her to compose herself, the endless isolation she endured when she refused to play the palace game. Now, Catherine stood in that same storm, alone, brave, trembling, and he was expected to silence her just as they had silenced his mother. His composure finally cracked. Sitting alone after the advisors left, William buried his face in his hands as tears came, first quietly, then uncontrollably. It wasn't only Catherine's pain that shattered him. It was everything he had spent years trying to bury. The loss of his mother, the emptiness of duty, the cruel cycle that turned love into liability inside those golden walls. He thought of his children, George, Charlotte, and Louis. 3 innocent souls already living under the same suffocating expectations that had once destroyed their grandmother. The thought made his heart ache. "Whatever it takes," he whispered to the empty room, his voice trembling with a vow no one else would ever hear. "I'll protect them." That wasn't the promise of a future king. It was the desperate oath of a father standing on the edge of collapse. He knew this decision would cost him more than reputation. It could cost him everything he'd been raised to preserve. But something inside him had shifted forever. The boy who had watched his mother's light fade had finally found the courage to fight for his own family's peace. But William's vow would soon ignite a new battle. Not between husband and wife, but between the future king and the reigning one. Stay with us. King Charles's immediate order: silence the princess. When Catherine's words echoed through Buckingham Palace, the air seemed to freeze. Every corridor, every chandelier-lit hall felt heavier than ever before. To King Charles, her heartfelt confession wasn't the plea of a mother. It was an open challenge to the monarchy itself. For decades, he had endured whispers, betrayal, and scandal. But nothing had ever struck this deep. This wasn't an external attack. It came from within the family, from someone the world adored. Camilla's reaction was even fiercer. She didn't see Catherine's speech as courage, but as a calculated betrayal. In her eyes, Catherine had done the unthinkable, used emotion to win the public's heart and turn it against the very institution that gave her power.
It's so weird when they get bigger to think that they were that tiny.
"She's weaponizing motherhood," Camilla reportedly hissed, her voice trembling with anger. What burned her most wasn't Catherine's words, but the world's reaction. Overnight sympathy had shifted. The headlines weren't about the monarchy. They were about the mother who dared to speak. Behind closed doors, chaos brewed. Within the hour, Charles called for an emergency meeting. Senior advisors gathered in the palace's crimson chamber, their faces pale under the chandelier's cold light. The king's tone was sharp, his patience gone. "How did this happen?" he demanded, not in confusion, but disbelief. No one answered. The room buzzed with fear and forced calm. Discussions turned to damage control, restricting Catherine's appearances, reshaping public narratives, and silencing the growing media storm. But Charles didn't want an explanation. He wanted obedience. "She will not speak again," he ordered. The command sliced through the air, final and absolute. And just like that, the monarchy's response began to take shape, not through reason or dialogue, but through suppression. Camilla's resentment only deepened. She had spent years clawing her way into acceptance, enduring public hatred and media humiliation. Yet, with a single emotional speech, Catherine had undone all of that. To the people, Camilla was the symbol of control, Catherine the symbol of compassion. One was royalty, respected but distant. The other, relatable, flawed, brave, human. And that terrified Camilla more than any scandal ever could. Soon, leaks began to emerge from the palace itself. Unnamed sources whispered to tabloids that Catherine was struggling, emotional, and mentally unstable, claims hauntingly familiar to those who remembered Diana's story.
Can turn the nourishment of the body into a painful attack on themselves.
The same tactics that once broke William's mother had been dusted off and used again, this time against his wife. But what the palace didn't anticipate was how much the world had changed. The people no longer believed everything they read. Instead, the attacks only made Catherine more beloved. Across continents, she was no longer seen as a princess bound by protocol, but as a mother standing up for her children. Her pain had become universal, echoed in the hearts of parents who understood what it meant to fight for their child's freedom. Social media exploded with messages of support, paintings, and quotes from her speech. The royal mask of perfection was cracking, and behind it, people saw something raw, something real. Then came the confrontation that shattered whatever calm remained. William, torn between duty and love, stormed into his father's study. The usually composed prince was visibly shaken. "She did it because she had to," he pleaded. "She's protecting our children, not defying you." But Charles, still bound to his crown more than his heart, snapped back. "She's endangering everything we've built." The exchange spiraled, emotions colliding like thunder. When Camilla stepped in, hoping to cool the fire, William turned sharply. His words cut deeper than any rebellion before. "If you silence her, you lose me too." It wasn't anger, it was heartbreak. In that moment, the heir to the throne chose humanity over hierarchy. That night, Buckingham was silent again, but it was the silence before a storm. The cracks in the monarchy's walls had widened beyond repair, and the outside world was no longer waiting quietly. From London to Los Angeles, people were rising, not in hatred, but in solidarity. Catherine's words had become more than a confession. They were a spark, and as that spark spread across the globe, one question burned brighter than ever. Was this the beginning of the monarchy's reckoning, or the rebirth of its most dangerous truth? Let's explore. The Catherine Effect. The world had never witnessed anything like it before. Within mere hours of Catherine's trembling confession, her words had escaped the palace gates and swept across continents like wildfire. It wasn't just another royal announcement, it was an awakening. That night, people didn't see a duchess wrapped in diamonds or a picture-perfect royal image. They saw a mother, stripped of pretense, standing before the world with a shaking voice and an unguarded heart. Her truth, raw, painful, and utterly human, rippled through television screens and timelines, bringing even the strongest to tears. Across the globe, her revelation ignited a movement. In London, crowds gathered outside Kensington Palace, not with cameras or curiosity, but with candles and silence. The air felt heavy, sacred even.
Say hello. Hi. That looks delicious. What happened to this one on the floor?
Across New York, Paris, and Sydney, people filled city squares holding signs that read, "Let them be children," and "No crown without compassion." It was no longer about monarchy. It was about motherhood, about love, about the fight to protect innocence in a world built on appearances. Catherine's courage had become universal. She wasn't just speaking for herself or her children anymore. She was speaking for every parent who had ever felt powerless under expectation. The press couldn't contain the storm. What began as a royal scandal soon turned into what headlines called the Catherine Effect. Morning news anchors replayed her speech with reverence. Commentators who once criticized her for being too silent now praised her bravery. Even long-loyal royal reporters confessed they had never seen anything so unfiltered, so fearless. Tabloids that once chased her every move suddenly printed editorials calling her the heart that shook the crown. The public no longer viewed her as the Duchess of Cambridge. They saw her as something far greater, a woman reclaiming her voice in a palace built to silence it. But behind the palace walls, the atmosphere was far from admiring. The silence from the royal family spoke louder than any statement. Each hour without response made the crown appear colder, more disconnected, almost fragile. Inside, King Charles's advisors scrambled, courtiers whispered, and William was caught in the middle of a storm that no protocol could contain. His wife had done what no one before her dared. She had broken the royal facade, exposing the human cost beneath it. Then came the moment that silenced the world once again. The palace gates opened, and Catherine returned, no longer trembling, afraid. She stood beneath the grey London sky, calm and resolute. The press hushed as she stepped to the microphone. This time, she didn't come to explain herself. She came to make history. "My children deserve to laugh without fear," she began softly, "to grow without duty, to live without being watched." And with that, she declared that her children would no longer take part in royal public duties. "Their childhood," she said, voice steady as ever, "is not a performance. It is theirs." Gasps filled the air. Generations of royal tradition were shattered in a heartbeat. The monarchy's future, the heirs themselves, had just been pulled out of the spotlight. Catherine had not just spoken her truth, she had rewritten the rules. So, was it a mother's cry for help, or a quiet rebellion against the system controlling her family? We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe.